So there seems to be an interesting sort of connection between these sorts of cultural syndromes, like the one you see in China, and then things like, for example, voodoo death, which you discussed a little bit, where literally the belief that you think you're dying or that someone has cursed you causes you to actually end up dying. So in what sense? Because that does seem like when you just hear about it, it seems really spooky and kind of weird. Like it's easy to say like, okay, these kids are just really scared. Maybe their penises are retracting like a little bit, but it's not sinking all the way into their bodies. Like it's not going to go missing. They're not going to die. But then you hear stories about people who think they've had a curse placed on them or think they're going to die and they actually end up dying. And that seems a little harder to sort of square away with our sort of modern conceptions of like how the world and our bodies work. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, that kept coming up, and I was really fascinated by that because it does get into it does take it kind of a step further, and I think it's a really interesting phenomenon. There's a lot of anecdotal cases of that in the literature, but it's really hard for obvious reasons to research, ethically because you can't just sort of do that. But it does happen where people feel, and this kind of led me into I was already sort of into the placebo-nocebo research, which is kind of where the rubber hits the road for these things where your beliefs kind of are translated into actual physical processes.
Yeah, so I think probably most of our viewers are familiar with the placebo effect, but could you explain a little bit more what the nocebo effect is?
Yeah, okay, so, well, first let me say the placebo effect. Most people, when they think of the placebo effect, they think it's a, sort of a perceptive thing or just a kind of imaginary thing. And that's actually not quite the case, according to all the sort of most recent understanding of it. There's a great book by Fabrizio Benedetti that kind of lays out, I think it's called Placebo Effects, that lays out all the kind of most recent understanding of it. And our understanding of it started to change because of some experiments in the 70s and 80s where I think the first one was where they induced the placebo effect in people. They gave them a placebo painkiller, and then they surreptitiously would give them naloxone, which is an opiate antagonist, which would counter any opiates in their system. And without telling them that they were getting this, their pain would start to increase. And so the body's actually producing an opiate that is being then negated by the naloxone, and that sort of understanding has grown a lot. We know a lot more about that, how it works and stuff. But it's a good example of how like it's not necessarily just an imaginary thing, but it kind of feeds into our opiate system, and also there's every system is different in how it works and how much it works and how well it works. And Benedetti has it kind of chapter by chapter, but it's really fascinating. Like, for example, if you have a deep brain stimulus thing in the head of a Parkinson patient and you turn it on, but don't tell them, you need twice as much voltage to get the same effect as if you tell them you're turning it on.
Oh, wow.
And so it's always kind of both our belief in it and the actual physical processes that are working together, and they seem to work better together than separately, and for a lot of complicated reasons. But the nocebo effect is just the opposite of that. When you can have negative effects from negative expectations, and there have been a lot of, or there have been some studies of that, in a roundabout way, like in one of Ted Kopchak's studies, they told people about the possible side effects, and then they'll have people drop out because they get the side effects in the placebo arm of the study. So they're actually not getting the drug, but they are experiencing these effects. And some of I think one of them they had 3 people had to drop out because their side effects were so severe, and so. You can't really say that they're not real. Yeah. But you can say they're not caused by the drug. And so the idea is that the nocebo effect or the voodoo death is kind of an extreme example of that. And obviously we don't know how it works, but I found like tons of anecdotal cases in the literature about that. One was a young woman who came into this hospital in Baltimore in 1967, and she had she had a kind of heart was racing, and they thought she had heart failure, and she had all these problems, but they couldn't figure out what was wrong with her. And then, toward the end of her stay, she told them that she had been born in near the Okefenokee Swamp, and on Friday the 13th, and two other women had been born that same day, and then they had all been cursed. This woman who delivered her was a root worker, which is there's a southern kind of hoodoo, which is religion, which is sort of mixed West African and Native American herbalism. And she told them they were all cursed. The first one was supposed to die before her 16th birthday. Mm-hmm. The second one was supposed to die before her 21st birthday, and the third one before her 22nd birthday. And then the first one did die in a car crash, I think, the day before her 16th birthday.
Oh, wow.
Then the second one went out on her 21st birthday. She thought she was free and clear, and she went out to a bar and to celebrate, and then she got shot by a gun that went off. Somebody had a fight, and then she was accidentally shot. And so the third woman thought for sure she was going to die before her 22nd birthday, and then the day before her birthday, she did actually die. And so there's a question of how that works, and what are the processes involved, and we don't basically really know. But there's a lot of other cases of that too. There was one in 1974 in Kentucky. This guy was told he had esophageal cancer and he was going to die in 2 weeks. He had 2 weeks to live. Oh, wow. And then 2 weeks later he died, and they opened him up and there's no esophageal cancer. But you can find also things like this in bigger data sets too, like the Framingham Heart Study. There was a really good study of that where they found that women who believed they were at risk of dying of heart disease were 3.6 times more likely to die of heart disease than women who didn't believe that, who had the same risk factors. Sorry, go ahead.
I was gonna say, so I mean, again, I don't want to suggest we're positing anything like spooky or supernatural or weirdly metaphysical when we're talking about this. We're not saying that people's penises are actually disappearing, or that they're actually voodoo curses, or that you can actually get cursed and then sort of die on your birthday. But it does, I think, highlight this really interesting psychological literature on just the ways our beliefs and expectations literally physically impact us.